Good evening, everyone. I want to start with a simple question. What if I told you that the way you treat a stranger on the street tomorrow morning could change the way your cells behave by tomorrow afternoon? I know how that sounds. It sounds like something you'd read on a poster in a yoga studio, not something you'd hear from a physician. But I'm not here tonight to give you a motivational quote. I'm here to give you science, real, peer-reviewed, replicated science about one of the most quietly powerful medical discoveries of the last 20 years. The connection between how we treat one another and how our bodies age, heal, and function at the most fundamental level. My name is Dr. Lillian Li. I've spent my career in clinical medicine, and like most doctors, I was trained to think about health in terms of numbers: blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, BMI. Those numbers matter, and I will never tell a patient to ignore them. But over the years, I kept noticing something the numbers couldn't explain. Two patients, same diagnosis, same treatment plan, same medications, and yet wildly different outcomes. One recovers quickly, sleeps well, keeps their appointments, seems to bounce back. The other struggles, relapses, seems worn down by life itself. For a long time, I chalked this up to luck or genetics or just how some people are. But the research that has emerged over the past 2 decades tells a more interesting story. One where our relationships, our sense of connection, and yes, our kindness toward others are not just nice to have extras in a good life. They appear to be biological inputs in the same category as diet, sleep, and exercise. Inputs that our bodies are listening to all the time at the level of gene expression. Tonight, I want to walk you through what we actually know, what we don't yet know, and why this matters for your health, starting today. 2. Introduction to the topic. So what exactly are we talking about when we say kindness changes your DNA? Let's be precise, because precision matters in medicine. And it matters even more when a topic could easily slide into wishful thinking. Kindness does not rewrite your genetic code. Your DNA sequence, the actual A's, T's, C's, and G's you inherited from your parents, stays the same throughout your life, whether you're generous or not. So when I say kindness changes your DNA, I'm talking about something called gene expression, not genetic mutation. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine your DNA as a massive cookbook containing tens of thousands of recipes. Every cell in your body has the exact same cookbook, but a heart cell isn't cooking up the same recipes as a skin cell or an immune cell. Each cell only opens certain pages, following only the recipes relevant to its job. That process of opening a page and following the recipe is what scientists call gene expression. And the field that studies how our environment, behavior, and experiences influence which pages get opened is called epigenetics, literally above the genetics. Epigenetics is the missing link between your life and your biology. It's the reason identical twins with the exact same DNA can develop different diseases, age at different rates, or respond differently to the same medication. Something is turning genes up or down, and increasingly, research shows that stress, isolation, and hostility turn certain genes up, while connection, purpose, and kindness turn other genes up. And the first set is not the set you want humming along at full volume for years on end. Why should you care? Because this isn't abstract laboratory trivia. The genes affected by our social experiences are the very genes involved in inflammation, immune defense, wound healing, and cardiovascular risk. In plain terms, how connected and how kind we are, both giving and receiving, appears to influence how quickly we heal, how well we fight off illness, and quite possibly, how long we live. 3. Medical explanation. Let me take you a little deeper into the biology, because I think when people understand the why, they're far more likely to actually change their behavior. The stress-inflammation pathway. When you experience chronic stress, loneliness, or hostility, either as the giver or the receiver of unkindness. Your body activates what we call the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis. Think of the HPA axis as your body's alarm system. In a genuine emergency, it's brilliant. It floods your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline, sharpens your focus, and prepares you to fight or flee. The problem is that this alarm system was built for short bursts, outrunning a predator, surviving an acute threat, not for the slow-burning stress of social isolation, conflict, or hostility that can stretch on for months or years. When the alarm stays on, cortisol stays elevated, and one of the many downstream effects is a shift in immune cell gene expression toward a pattern researchers have nicknamed the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. In simple terms, genes that drive inflammation get turned up, and genes involved in antiviral defense get turned down. A little inflammation is a good thing. It's how your body fights infection and heals wounds. But chronic low-grade inflammation, sustained over years, is now understood to be a common thread running through heart disease, diabetes, depression, certain cancers, and accelerated aging. Researchers sometimes call this inflammaging, inflammation that quietly ages the body from the inside, the oxytocin vagal pathway. Now here's the flip side, and this is where kindness comes in. Acts of genuine connection, helping someone, being helped, feeling like part of a community, appear to activate very different biological machinery. They're associated with the release of oxytocin, a hormone involved in bonding and trust, and with increased activity of the vagus nerve, the great communication highway that runs from your brain down through your heart, lungs, and gut. And that helps switch your body from alarm mode into rest, digest, and repair mode. Higher vagal tone is associated with lower resting heart rate variability changes that reflect better cardiovascular regulation, better stress recovery, and even better blood sugar control. In other words, when you feel genuinely connected to other people through kindness, community, purpose, your nervous system shifts out of the sympathetic fight-or-flight state and into the parasympathetic rest and repair state, and it can stay there more often. The telomere connection. One of the most fascinating threads of research involves telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes, often compared to the plastic tips on shoelaces that keep them from fraying. Every time a cell divides, its telomeres shorten slightly. When they become too short, the cell can no longer divide and either becomes dysfunctional or dies. Telomere length has become one of the most studied biological markers of cellular aging. Chronic stress and hostility have been associated with shorter telomeres. Nobel Prize-winning research by Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn and colleagues found that caregivers under chronic stress had shorter telomeres than non-caregivers of similar age. Essentially, their cells looked older than their birthdays suggested. Other studies have found associations between prosocial behavior, strong social ties, sense of purpose, and longer telomere length or slower telomere shortening over time. I want to be careful here because this is an active and evolving area of research, and correlation is not the same as proof of direct causation in every study. But the overall pattern across immunology, endocrinology, and cellular biology is remarkably consistent. Chronic hostility and isolation push the body toward a biological profile associated with faster aging and higher disease risk, while genuine connection and kindness push the body toward a profile associated with resilience and repair. A simple analogy. Think of your body's stress and repair systems like a seesaw. On one side sits your sympathetic nervous system, alert, defensive, inflammatory. On the other side sits your parasympathetic system, calm, restorative, healing. Chronic conflict, isolation, and unkindness keep tipping the seesaw toward the alert side and holding it there. Connection, purpose, and kindness Let the seesaw rock back toward rest and repair. Your body was never designed to sit on the alert side for years at a time. And kindness, it turns out, is one of the most reliable ways we know of to let the seesaw come back down. 4. Warning signs. Your body may be stuck in alert mode. This isn't a topic with classic symptoms, the way, say, appendicitis has classic symptoms. But there are patterns I look for in my patients, and in myself, that suggest someone's body has been living too long in that chronic stress, chronic isolation state. Persistent fatigue that isn't explained by poor sleep alone, frequent minor illnesses. You seem to catch every cold going around slow healing cuts, wounds, or recovery from minor procedures. Difficulty managing blood pressure or blood sugar, despite following your treatment plan. A persistent sense of loneliness or disconnection, even when surrounded by people, irritability, cynicism, or a short fuse that feels newer or worse than it used to be. Sleep that doesn't feel restorative. None of these symptoms are unique to loneliness or a lack of kindness. They overlap heavily with depression, thyroid disease, anemia, sleep apnea, and many other medical conditions. That's exactly why I'm not asking you to self-diagnose kindness deficiency syndrome. There's no such diagnosis. What I am asking is that if you notice this pattern in yourself, you see it as one more reason to talk with your doctor and one more reason to look honestly at your relationships and your sense of connection alongside a proper medical evaluation. If you ever experience chest pain, severe shortness of breath, sudden weakness, or thoughts of harming yourself, that is not a moment for reflection on relationships. That is a moment to seek emergency care immediately. 5. How doctors evaluate the bigger picture. When patients come to me with the fatigue, the frequent illness, the sense of being worn down, I don't order a test called a kindness panel. That doesn't exist. What I do is a thorough medical evaluation to rule out treatable causes, and then I widen the lens. That evaluation typically includes a detailed history, sleep, diet, exercise, but also relationships, stress, and sense of purpose. Basic blood work, complete blood count, thyroid function, inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein, blood sugar, and lipid panel blood pressure, and heart rate assessment. Screening for depression and anxiety using validated questionnaires. In research settings, some scientists measure telomere length or specific inflammatory gene expression patterns. But I want to be clear, these are research tools right now, not routine clinical tests you'd expect at your annual physical. The reason I ask about relationships and connection as part of a standard visit isn't because I've stopped being a real doctor and started being a life coach. It's because the data, the actual hard clinical data, increasingly shows that social connection is a legitimate vital sign, on par with blood pressure, for predicting future health outcomes. Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad's landmark meta-analyses, looking at over 300,000 participants, found that weak social ties were associated with an increased risk of early death, comparable to well-known risk factors like smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and exceeding the risks associated with obesity or physical inactivity. That is not a small effect. That is a headline-level medical finding that, frankly, hasn't gotten nearly the attention it deserves. 6. Treatment and management. Now, I want to be very careful in this section, because I am not telling you that kindness is a substitute for medicine. If you have high blood pressure, take your medication. If you have diabetes, follow your management plan. If you're depressed, please see a professional. Eye therapy and, when appropriate, medication save lives, and no amount of kindness practice should replace that care. What I am telling you is that alongside evidence-based medical treatment, there is a growing evidence base for connection-based interventions as a legitimate complementary layer of care. Social prescribing. In the UK and increasingly elsewhere, doctors now formally prescribe community engagement, volunteering, group activities, walking clubs, alongside medication, particularly for patients with depression, chronic pain, and loneliness-related conditions. Early studies show reductions in GP visits and improvements in well-being. Volunteering and purpose-driven activity. Multiple longitudinal studies have found that regular volunteers report better mental health, and some studies link volunteering to lower mortality risk. Though I'll note, as any careful physician should, that people who volunteer may already be healthier to begin with, so researchers work hard to account for that in their study design. Mind-body practices. Loving kindness meditation, a structured practice of directing warmth and goodwill first toward yourself, then toward others, has been studied by researchers including Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, whose work found associations between this practice, increased positive emotions, improved vagal tone, and even changes in gene expression patterns related to inflammation. This remains an active area of research, and results should be interpreted with appropriate caution, but the direction of the findings is consistent. Group-based support. For patients managing chronic illness, support groups, whether for cancer, cardiac rehab, or chronic pain, consistently show benefits beyond the specific medical information shared. The connection itself appears therapeutic. Any of these should be personalized. A grieving widower's plan will look different from a stressed new parent's plan, which will look different from a retiree looking for purpose. This is a conversation to have with your own physician or therapist, not a one-size-fits-all prescription I can hand out from a stage. 7. Prevention and healthy habits. Here is the good news. Unlike many risk factors, this one is remarkably accessible. You don't need a gym membership or a special diet. You need mostly to be intentional about connection. A few concrete, realistic habits I recommend to my patients. 1 genuine act of kindness a day. Research on pro-social spending and small daily acts of kindness, holding a door, genuinely thanking someone, checking in on a friend, shows measurable boosts in the giver's well-being, not just the receiver's. Protect at least 1 real conversation a day, not a text, not a like on a post. An actual conversation, even 5 minutes with real back and forth. Build weak ties, not just close ones. Chatting with your barista, your mail carrier, a neighbor. These small interactions matter more for well-being than people expect. Volunteer, even in small doses. Studies suggest health benefits appear even at modest levels of volunteering. A couple of hours a month, not a full second job. Practice a brief, loving kindness meditation. Even 5 to 10 minutes, a few times a week, has been associated in research with improved mood and physiological markers of stress reduction. Don't neglect the fundamentals. None of this replaces sleep, movement, nutrition, and your regular medical care. Kindness is a powerful addition to your health toolkit, not a replacement for the rest of it. Watch for compassion fatigue. Kindness should energize you over time, not deplete you. If you're a caregiver or in a helping profession, you need support and boundaries too. Burnout is real, and it undermines the very biology we're discussing. 8. Common myths and misconceptions. Let me clear up a few misunderstandings I hear often, because I think intellectual honesty matters here as much as inspiration. Myth: kindness will cure my disease. No responsible physician would ever tell you that. Kindness and connection appear to influence risk, resilience, and recovery trajectories. They are not a replacement for chemotherapy, insulin, blood pressure medication, or surgery. Please don't let anyone, including a well-meaning speaker like me, suggest otherwise. Myth: this means sick people or lonely people did something wrong. Absolutely not, and I want to be firm about this. Illness is caused by an enormous web of factors: genetics, environment, access to care, pure chance. Loneliness is very often circumstantial: the loss of a spouse, a move to a new city, a demanding caregiving role. not a personal failing. This research is not about blame. It's about identifying one more lever we can pull to support health for those who have the capacity to pull it. Myth: kindness literally rewrites your genetic code. As I mentioned earlier, no sigh, your DNA sequence doesn't change. What changes is gene expression, the volume dial on genes you already have. That's a real and significant biological phenomenon, but it's a different mechanism than mutation, and it's important not to overstate it. Myth: you have to be a saint or volunteer constantly to get any benefit. The research actually points the other direction. Small, consistent, genuine acts of connection seem to matter more than occasional grand gestures. Myth: this research is settled science with all the mechanisms fully mapped out. It isn't, and I'd be doing you a disservice as a physician if I told you otherwise. This is a genuinely exciting and rapidly evolving field. Some of the gene expression studies have modest sample sizes. Some effects are correlational. Reputable researchers in the field, including the ones I've mentioned tonight, continue to refine and sometimes revise their conclusions, as good science should. 9. Doctor's advice. A personal word. If you take nothing else from tonight, take this. I did not go into medicine because I loved paperwork or insurance forms. I think we can all agree those are nobody's favorite part of healthcare. I went into medicine because I wanted to help people live longer, fuller, less painful lives. And what the research of the last 2 decades has taught me, more than any single new drug or device, is that we have been underestimating the medical power of how we treat one another. I am not asking you to be relentlessly cheerful or to ignore real pain, grief, or hardship in your life. That would be dishonest and, frankly, unhealthy advice. I am asking you to notice that connection and kindness are not soft, sentimental extras tacked onto a health plan. They appear to be legitimate biological inputs, working through real pathways. The HPA axis, the vagus nerve, inflammatory gene expression, telomere maintenance. Pathways as real as the ones targeted by the medications I prescribe every day. Please don't let this become one more source of guilt or pressure. I have to be kinder or I'll get sick faster, is not the message. Chronic anxiety about optimizing your biology is its own stressor, and it defeats the purpose. The message is simpler and gentler than that. The next time you're deciding whether it's worth the effort to check in on a friend, to forgive someone, to volunteer an hour of your time, to simply be patient with a stranger having a hard day, know that you are not just doing something nice. You may quite literally be doing something good for your cells. We spend so much energy and so much of our healthcare system's resources focused on what we can measure with a needle, a scan, or a prescription pad. And that medicine has saved countless lives, mine included, in my own family. But tonight, I wanted to make the case for a different kind of medicine, one that costs nothing, has no side effects when practiced with self-compassion, and is available to every single person in this room, regardless of income, insurance, or access to a hospital. The medicine of showing up for one another, the science is still being written. Researchers are still mapping the exact pathways, still refining the studies, still debating the fine print, as they should. But the broad strokes are clear and consistent enough that I feel comfortable saying this to you as your physician. Connection is not a luxury. Kindness is not just a virtue. They appear to be, quite literally, part of how your body maintains and repairs itself. So here is my closing prescription, and it's one I'll happily write for every person in this room, free of charge. This week, do one genuinely kind thing for someone else, and let someone be kind to you in return. Have one real conversation. Notice how your body feels afterward. Your DNA isn't going anywhere. But how it's expressed, how it's read, used, and lived out in your cells every single day may be more in your hands and in your relationships than you ever imagined. Thank you.